Our next guest has been rather rudely left to wait for now 21 minutes on the line, and I'm grateful to him for his grace in that. He's David Kurten, UKIP member of the London Assembly, and he joins me now, I think, from the Brexit party that I might well have been at myself, David, if I hadn't had to work this evening.
Good evening, George.
Give my regards.
With us at the Brexit party.
Yes, give my regards to the party. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you. Now, I want to talk to you about the UK's biggest increase in population for 70 years, since 1947. On the face of it, that's quite a striking point. Of course, it's not all of it to do with immigration, and even the part of it that is to do with immigration is not wholly EU immigration, but it's nonetheless obviously grist to the UKIP mill, isn't it?
Well, it is. I mean, this is something that people are very concerned about all around the country. You have different types of immigration in the country. So, in inner London, you probably have a lot of people who are working in financial services and these kind of industries, and people who live in Richmond Park and places like that have a very lovely experience of immigration, but that's not the same experience that people might have, say, in Sunderland or Skegness or Margate or places like that. But it's huge. It's a huge number. I mean, 336,000 is the number that comes from immigration out of the 538,000 population increase. So, people do have these grave concerns about the effect on housing and on public services, which I'm sure you know and the listeners know is something that, UKIP has been saying for a long time and resonates with a lot of people. But, we do also have to remember these numbers are now 12 months out of date because they were the 12 months to June 2016. So another year has gone by since then, and so the figures we have for the population, there's probably another 500,000 or so people living in the country on top of the figures that we get from those numbers as well. So the story goes on of mass immigration. So it is something that is causing concern.
Well, of course, it's different in different parts of the country. The rise in immigration in Scotland, for example, was scarcely anything at all. The rise in immigration in other parts of England, or Wales for that matter, was scarcely anything at all. Most of the growth was in the Greater London area. Now, you're a London member of the, you're a member of the London Assembly, of course, for UKIP. This could be absorbed and could even be a profitable immigration if it were not for the fact that our public services, including public housing, were not under such parlous pressures. And of course, as you say, some of this immigration will be at the upper end of the income quartiles, of course. Some of it is highly paid and highly skilled, very well remunerated, banking staffs and other high flyers who've come from the EU and who will go back to the EU. So it's not a national picture, this, is it?
Well, no, I mean, you do have that, kind of immigration, you say, people who are earning 6 or 7 figure salaries, and not just from the EU, also people from, America.
From the US, from Australia and so on, yes.
And Far Eastern countries as well. But, one of the very interesting things and that is rarely said is that there is a large movement of what you might call indigenous British people, sort of, people who have been in London. Their families have been in London for decades or centuries, and they're moving out of London simply because house prices are getting beyond the reach of local people. So you're finding the sort of demographics of London changing quite rapidly. And if you go back to 2011, because that's when the last census was done, it shows that 600,000 people classed as white British moved out of London in those 10 years between 2001 and 2011. So that's probably continued, and still in some of the figures that we have, the yearly figures from the Office for National Statistics shows that a lot of sort of indigenous people, who've been, families have been in London for a very long time, are moving out to the country. So, and part of the reason is because of the huge increase in house prices, and you've got to look at supply and demand for house prices, and there's no way around it. It's everyone from most political parties, apart from us, is promises before a mayoral election or a general election to build 60, 70, 80,000 homes a year in London, but really the figure is 20 or 25,000. It's been that number for 20 years or so.
And even those, David, are increasingly out of reach. What are called affordable houses are only affordable if you've got quite serious income. I mean, one of the grotesque things that was thrown up by the most grotesque of all, the Grenfell Tower disaster, was that in the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, in the last 20 years, eight council houses were built. And that's true of many boroughs. Council houses were sold, none were built. So-called targets for affordable housing have been completely underachieved, even when they were written down. Others wrote them down lower and still didn't achieve the lower targets. And only this day, the mayor of London is bleating about the cut in the number of affordable houses that are to be provided in the end at the Battersea Power Station complex. But nothing is done to impose these levels, that even small levels that these politicians are proving. So my point is, one problem is the large number of people arriving, but another problem is the total failure of public authority to make the necessary provision for the absorption of these large numbers that are arriving.
Well, absolutely. And, one thing that people find, absolutely terrible to live with is when you have these huge estate regenerations. And, if you live in London, you may have heard of the Aylesbury estate. It's a huge estate in
yes.
Southwark. Yeah, it was where Tony Blair did his first speech after he was elected in 1997. And that's all up for regeneration. And, the idea is it's going to be knocked down block by block, and they will build new regenerated blocks of flats, and perhaps provide a total number of flats, 1,000 or more in excess. So they go up from 2,000 approximately to 3,000 flats, and a certain proportion of that will be affordable housing. But if affordable housing is defined as being 80%, up to 80% of the market value, so if a house goes on and the market value is £600,000, then an affordable flat is £480,000. That's out of the reach of all but the very highest paid people in professional industries. So local people who have lived in London for a very, very long time, they get the promise of affordable housing, and then it doesn't materialize. And then the only option for many people is to move out to Slough or to Gravesend or Rochester or other places, and be completely dislocated from their community. And it's a great injustice. But the problem also does go to supply, that even if you have a target of building 35, 50% of affordable homes, and you're only building 20,000 homes a year in London, that only means 10,000 affordable homes. Even if it does happen, that's nowhere near enough for the population increase. London's part of the population increase in that year was 135,000. So 20,000 homes are not going to be enough for an increase in population of 135,000, and that's not even counting the 20-year backlog of people. And, you see in Barking and Dagenham, for example, there's a 50-year waiting list to get a council home. So, what chance do people have?
Well, look, David, David, I don't know where UKIP have been hiding you, but if they'd put you up front, you might not be in the parlous condition your party now is. Go back and enjoy the party. Thanks very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.